He wasn't worthless. He was just waiting for someone who could still see what the world had forgotten. The auction hall smelled faintly of damp wood and old coats, the kind of place where voices echoed longer than they should and judgment settled quicker than dust. Folding chairs scraped against the concrete floor as men shifted, murmuring in low tones, hands buried in pockets, eyes scanning not with kindness but calculation. A flickering strip light hummed overhead, casting a pale wash across the narrow pen at the center of the room where the dog stood. He didn't bark. He didn't beg. He simply stood there, thin but upright, his coat a muted blend of black and tan dulled by neglect, his ears half raised as if listening for something that wasn't there anymore. A number tag hung loosely from the metal gate, swaying slightly with each distant footstep, though no one came closer. Next lot, the auctioneer called, his voice flat, practiced, already moving on in his mind. German Shepherd. No papers. No history worth noting. A ripple of disinterest passed through the room like a cold draft. Someone coughed. Another man gave a quiet laugh under his breath. The dog's eyes moved, not frantically, not pleading, just steady, tracking the shapes of people as they passed him by, as if memorizing faces that would never remember him. Somewhere near the back, a chair creaked as someone stood, coat brushing against wool, boots heavy on the floor. Oliver Hayes hadn't planned to stop. The road into town had been longer than expected, the kind that winds through hedgerows and gray fields where the sky feels lower than usual, pressing down with a quiet weight. He had meant to keep driving, to pass the old livestock market without a second glance. But something, perhaps the open gate, perhaps the dull hum of voices, had slowed him just enough. Now he stood just inside the doorway, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, shoulders squared out of habit rather than intent. He didn't move closer. Not yet. The dog shifted his weight slightly, one paw lifting then settling again, as though testing the ground beneath him. His ribs showed faintly beneath his coat, not stark, not alarming. Just enough to suggest time had not been kind. A faint scar traced along his flank, half hidden beneath fur that hadn't been properly brushed in weeks, maybe months. Still, there was something composed about him. Not broken. Not entirely. Just waiting. Any bids? The auctioneer asked, tapping the side of the pen with a wooden stick, the sound dull and hollow. Silence answered. A man in a tweed cap shook his head without even looking up. Another checked his watch. It wasn't cruelty. Not quite. It was something quieter. Indifference. Oliver's gaze lingered longer than he intended. He told himself it was nothing. Just another dog. Just another moment that didn't belong to him. He shifted his stance, ready to turn, to step back out into the pale afternoon where the air smelled of rain and distant fields. But then the dog looked at him. Not in the way animals sometimes do, quick, uncertain, searching for food or safety. This was different. Still, direct, as if something old and buried had surfaced for a brief second, enough to recognize what stood in the doorway. Oliver felt it before he understood it, a faint tightening in his chest, subtle but unmistakable. His right hand moved slightly within his pocket, brushing against the fabric that covered the ink on his skin. A German Shepherd, etched in black and gray along his forearm, worn soft with time but never forgotten. He exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible beneath the hum of the lights. Come on then, someone muttered near the front. No one's taking that one. A few heads nodded. The auctioneer glanced down at his clipboard, ready to strike the lot, to move on without ceremony. Oliver turned his head, just enough to break the line of sight. This wasn't his concern. It didn't need to be. He had walked away from harder things than this. Fields, missions, faces he still saw when the night stretched too long. One more step, and he would be gone. But his feet didn't move. Behind him, the door creaked softly in the wind, a faint chill slipping through the gap. In front of him, the dog remained still, as though he understood that something fragile balanced in the silence between them. Not hope. Not yet. Just a moment. And sometimes, a moment is all it takes to change the direction of a life. The silence does not break all at once. It stretches, thin and fragile, like frost across glass, waiting for the smallest pressure to crack it. The auctioneer clears his throat, already half-turned, pen hovering above the page as though this moment has already passed. Right then, he says, voice carrying a note of routine dismissal, we will move along. The wooden stick taps lightly against the metal pin, a hollow sound that echoes longer than it should. The dog does not flinch. He simply watches. Oliver exhales, slow and controlled, the kind of breath learned over years where hesitation could cost more than time. He shifts his weight again, one foot angling toward the door, the outside air visible in a thin strip of gray light. It would be easy to leave, to let the moment fold into itself and disappear like so many others before it. He has done it before, more times than he can count. But something in the stillness feels unfinished, like a sentence left without its final word. The dog's gaze does not follow the others. It remains fixed, steady, unblinking, not pleading, not desperate, just present, as if he understands that this is the edge of something, though he cannot name it. Oliver's jaw tightens slightly. His fingers curl within his pocket, brushing once more against the ink beneath the fabric. He remembers the day he had it done, not the pain. That part had been insignificant. It was the reason that stayed. A partner once. A dog not unlike this one. Loyal in a way that did not need explanation. Gone in a way that never quite settled. 10 pounds, Oliver says. The words arrive quietly, almost swallowed by the room, but they land with a clarity that cuts through the murmur like a blade through fog. The auctioneer pauses mid-motion, turning back with a raised brow, as if unsure he heard correctly. I beg your pardon. A few heads turn now, slow and curious. Not interested in the dog, but in the man who has chosen to notice him. Oliver does not step forward. He does not raise his voice. 10 pounds, he repeats, steady, measured, as though stating a fact rather than making an offer. A short laugh escapes from somewhere near the front row, low and disbelieving. You are having a laugh, a man mutters, shaking his head. Another leans back in his chair, arms folded, watching with mild amusement. The auctioneer glances around, giving space for another bid that does not come. The room settles again, not silent this time, but expectant in a different way. 10 pounds, he repeats, this time with a slight nod, the gavel lifting just a fraction. Any advance? Nothing. Not a hand. Not a voice. Just the faint hum of the light above and the distant rattle of wind against the building's outer wall. Going once, the auctioneer says, the rhythm returning to his tone, though something in his eyes lingers on Oliver a moment longer than necessary. The dog shifts again, a small movement, barely noticeable. One step forward, then stillness. Going twice. Oliver's gaze does not leave the animal. There is no triumph in his expression, no satisfaction, only a quiet resolve that has already decided the outcome before the words were spoken. Sold. The gavel falls with a soft, final knock that echoes through the hall. It is not loud. It does not need to be. Something unseen settles with it, like dust returning to the ground. A few chairs scrape as people begin to rise, their attention already drifting to the next matter, the next errand, the next forgettable moment in an ordinary day. The dog does not move immediately. He remains where he is, as though the sound has not yet reached him, or perhaps as though he does not quite believe what it means. Oliver steps forward at last, each stride unhurried, deliberate. The distance between them is not far, perhaps a few meters, but it carries a weight that stretches beyond the room. As he approaches, the details become clearer. The faint tremor in the dog's flank. The dull sheen of fur that once held more life. The eyes, though, remain unchanged. Clear, watchful, alive in a way that cannot be measured by appearance alone. The auctioneer unlatches the pin with a metallic click, stepping aside with a gesture that is more practical than ceremonial. No guarantees, he says, almost as an afterthought. What you see is what you get. Oliver gives a small nod, not an agreement, but an acknowledgement. He has never relied on guarantees. The gate opens fully now, the space between them unobstructed. The dog hesitates, not out of fear, something else. A pause that feels like memory pressing against the present, trying to make sense of it. Oliver lowers himself slightly, not fully crouching, but enough to reduce the distance, his posture relaxed, open, patient. He does not reach out immediately. He waits. Seconds pass. The room continues to empty behind him, voices fading, footsteps retreating, until only the faint hum remains. Then, slowly, the dog takes a step. Another. Careful, measured, each movement considered as though the ground itself might shift if he is not cautious. He stops just within arm's reach, close enough now that Oliver can see the subtle details, the fine lines around the eyes, the slight hitch in the breath, the quiet strength that has not yet given way. Oliver lifts his hand at last, palm open, fingers relaxed. He does not force the moment. He offers it. The dog leans forward, just enough for his nose to brush against the fabric of Oliver's sleeve. A single breath. Warm. Real. Then stillness again. Not rejection. Not fear. Something closer to recognition, though neither of them fully understands it yet. Oliver's hand hovers for a second longer before settling gently against the side of the dog's neck, the touch light, steady, grounding. The fur is rougher than it should be, thinner in places, but beneath it there is life. Quiet. Resilient. The dog does not pull away. He stands there, accepting the contact, his body no longer trembling quite as much. Outside, the wind shifts, carrying the faint scent of rain through the open doorway. Oliver straightens slowly, his hand remaining in place for a moment longer before he lets it fall. "Come on then," he says softly, the words not a command, but an invitation. The dog looks at him, ears lifting slightly, as though listening not just to the sound, but to something deeper beneath it. And for the first time since he entered the room, he moves without hesitation, stepping forward to follow. The air outside feels different, wider somehow, as though the world has been waiting just beyond those doors without urgency, without expectation, simply existing in its quiet, steady way. Oliver steps out first, boots meeting the gravel with a soft crunch, the faint scent of rain now stronger, carried on a breeze that moves low across the open yard. Behind him, there is a brief pause. Not long, just enough to notice. Then the sound follows. Careful pause against the threshold. The dog emerges into the light, blinking once as if adjusting to something more than brightness, his gaze shifting across the unfamiliar openness where nothing confines him, and yet everything feels uncertain. Oliver does not look back immediately. He knows the hesitation. He has felt it himself, standing on the edge of places that asked for trust without offering proof. Instead, he walks a few steps forward, slow, unhurried, hands loose at his sides, giving space without withdrawing presence. The gravel stretches into a narrow lane bordered by low stone walls, damp with moss and thyme. Beyond them, fields roll gently under a sky that hangs heavy with soft gray clouds, the kind that promise rain but hold it back just a little longer. A van passes in the distance, its sound muted, ordinary, the world continuing without notice. Oliver stops near the edge of the lane and waits. Not with impatience, not with expectation, simply waiting. The dog steps forward again, this time without stopping at the doorway. Each movement is measured, deliberate, as though he is learning the shape of freedom one step at a time. He keeps a short distance, not close enough to touch, not far enough to leave. A space that feels chosen rather than forced. Oliver glances down then, briefly, just enough to acknowledge him. Not much to look at. He murmurs, though the words carry no judgment, only a quiet honesty shaped by years of saying less than he feels. The dog's ears shift at the sound, catching the tone rather than the meaning, his gaze lifting to meet Oliver's for a second longer than before. There is something there now. Not trust, not yet, but the absence of fear, and sometimes that is where everything begins. The car is parked a short distance away, a dark, weathered estate with mud along the lower panels and a faint scratch along the rear door that speaks of narrow lanes and forgotten fences. Oliver reaches it and opens the back door without hesitation, stepping aside as he does. He does not gesture. He does not call. He simply makes the space available. The dog approaches slowly, lowering his head slightly as he peers inside. The scent is unfamiliar, layered with fabric, old leather, and something faintly human that lingers without being overwhelming. He pauses again, not because he is afraid, but because this choice feels larger than the others. Oliver rests his hand on the edge of the open door, his fingers tapping lightly once, twice, a small, unconscious rhythm. "It is all right," he says quietly, the words low and steady, more for reassurance than instruction. The dog studies him, then the space, then him again. And then, without drama, without hesitation, he steps in. Oliver closes the door gently, the soft click echoing briefly in the still air before fading into the quiet of the lane. He moves around to the driver's side, sliding into the seat with a familiar motion, hands settling on the wheel as though returning to something known. For a moment, he does not start the engine. He sits there, looking ahead, the faint reflection of the sky in the windscreen. The world held in a pause that feels intentional rather than uncertain. Behind him, there is the subtle sound of movement. Fabric shifting, a careful repositioning. Oliver glances in the rearview mirror. The dog has settled on the seat, not fully relaxed, not curled, but upright, alert, watching, always watching. Their eyes meet in the glass for the briefest moment. Then Oliver looks forward again and turns the key. The engine starts with a low, steady hum, familiar and grounding. The tires roll slowly over the gravel, carrying them away from the place where nothing had been expected and something quiet had begun. The road curves gently out of the yard and into the narrow lanes that stretch between fields, hedges leaning inward as though sharing secrets across the path. The sky darkens slightly as the clouds gather, the first drops of rain beginning to tap lightly against the windscreen, soft and irregular. The wipers move once, then again, clearing just enough to see what lies ahead. Oliver drives without haste, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting loosely near the gear, his posture relaxed but attentive. He does not turn on the radio. He does not fill the silence. It remains between them, not empty, but full in a way that does not require words. After a while, the dog shifts again. Not restlessly, just enough to adjust, to find a position that feels less like readiness and more like something approaching ease. His head lowers slightly, though his eyes remain open, tracking the passing shapes of hedges and stone walls, the blur of fields beyond. A memory flickers somewhere beneath that watchfulness. Not clear, not whole, just fragments. Movement, command, the steady presence of a voice that once guided each step. It does not hurt, not in the way it might have before. It simply exists, like an echo carried on a distant wind. Oliver's gaze remains forward, but his awareness does not narrow. He notices the shift, the small changes, the quiet signs that something within the animal beside him is beginning, slowly, to settle. "We will get you sorted," he says after a time, the words spoken not as a promise, but as a statement of intent, grounded and simple. The dog's ears flick once at the sound, his head lifting just a fraction, as though recognizing the shape of care within the tone. Outside, the rain begins to fall more steadily now, tracing soft lines across the glass, the world beyond blurring slightly as they continue along the winding road. And in the quiet space of that moving car, between the rhythm of tires on wet tarmac and the steady breath of something that has not yet decided to trust but no longer needs to fear, a beginning takes root. Not loud, not certain, but real enough to carry forward. The road narrows as the village begins to take shape, not all at once but in fragments, a stone wall here, a weathered sign there, the faint outline of rooftops rising beyond hedgerows that have stood longer than most memories. The rain softens to a fine mist, clinging to the windscreen in delicate beads that catch the muted afternoon light. Oliver slows the car slightly as he turns into a lane lined with old sycamore trees, their branches arching overhead like quiet guardians of a place that does not rush for anyone. The tires hum gently over damp tarmac, a steady rhythm that fills the silence without breaking it. Behind him, the dog remains upright, though the tension in his posture has eased by a small, almost unnoticeable degree. His breathing is steadier now, his gaze less fixed, more curious, tracking the shifting patterns of light and shadow as they pass beneath the trees. Oliver turns once more, a simple movement guided by familiarity rather than thought, and the house comes into view. It is not large, not imposing. A modest brick cottage set slightly back from the lane, with a low fence and a gate that leans just a little to one side, as though it has been opened and closed more times than it was ever meant to endure. The garden is untidy in a way that suggests neglect not from carelessness, but from absence. Grass grown uneven, a few stubborn weeds pushing through the gravel path, a wooden bench beneath the window worn smooth by weather and time. Oliver pulls the car to a stop just outside the gate and switches off the engine. The quiet that follows is immediate and complete, broken only by the faint ticking of cooling metal and the distant call of a bird somewhere beyond the hedges. For a moment, Neither of them moves. Then Oliver reaches for the handle and steps out, the air cooler now, carrying that distinct scent of wet earth and leaves. He walks around to the back door and opens it, the familiar creak of the hinge sounding louder than it should in the stillness. The dog watches him, ears lifting slightly, his body poised but not rigid. Oliver steps back, giving space again, allowing the choice to remain with the animal rather than forcing it forward. "This is it," he says quietly, though the words carry no expectation, only a simple offering of place. The dog lowers his head slightly, sniffing the air that drifts in through the open door. It is different from before, less sharp, more layered. Wood earth. Something faintly warm beneath it all, like the lingering trace of something once lived in and not entirely lost. He shifts forward, one paw touching the edge of the seat, then the ground. He pauses there, feeling the texture beneath him, the subtle give of gravel compared to the hard floor of the auction pen. Then he steps fully out, standing beside the car, his body angled slightly toward Oliver, but not pressed close. Oliver closes the door gently, the soft click marking a quiet transition that neither of them names. He moves toward the gate, pushing it open with a hand that does not quite meet resistance. It swings inward with a low, tired sound. The dog follows at a distance of a few steps, his movements measured but more fluid now, less burdened by hesitation. They cross the small garden together, the uneven ground shifting underfoot, the faint rustle of leaves brushing against the edges of the path. Oliver reaches the front door and pauses, his hand resting briefly against the wood as though acknowledging something unseen on the other side. Then he opens it. The interior is dim at first, the light from outside stretching just far enough to reveal outlines. A narrow hallway, worn floorboards, a coat hook with a single jacket hanging slightly askew. The air inside holds a quiet stillness, not empty, but settled, as though time has moved slower here than elsewhere. Oliver steps in without hesitation, setting his keys down on a small table by the door. He does not turn on the lights immediately. He lets the space speak first, lets the natural light find its way through the windows and fill the corners gradually. Behind him, the dog stands at the threshold. He does not enter. Not yet. His head tilts slightly, ears shifting as he listens to the silence within, different from the silence outside, deeper somehow, carrying echoes that are not sounds but impressions. Oliver glances back over his shoulder. He does not call. He does not urge. He simply waits, his posture relaxed, his presence steady, as though he understands that this moment is not about invitation, but about permission. Seconds pass. Then the dog takes a step forward. The floorboards respond with a soft creak, the sound unfamiliar but not alarming. Another step. Then another. He moves into the hallway, his nose lifting slightly as he takes in the scent of the place, the subtle traces left behind in wood and fabric, in corners where time has gathered quietly. Oliver watches him for a moment, then turns and walks further inside, moving into the small sitting room where a fire has not been lit in some time, but still holds the faint scent of ash and old warmth. He kneels by the hearth, gathering a few pieces of wood from a small stack nearby, his movements practiced, calm, unhurried. The dog remains near the doorway at first, observing, his body angled toward the exit as though keeping that option within reach. But as Oliver strikes the match and a small flame catches, flickering to life with a soft, steady glow, something shifts again. The light is gentle. The warmth, though slight at first, carries a promise that does not need to be spoken. The dog takes another step into the room. Then another. He does not approach the fire directly. He circles slightly, choosing a spot where he can see both Oliver and the doorway, a position shaped by instinct rather than fear. He lowers himself slowly, front legs first, then easing the rest of his body down with care. It is not a full rest. Not yet, but it is closer than before. Oliver sits back on his heels, watching the small flame grow, the light dancing across the walls in quiet patterns. He does not look at the dog immediately. He does not need to. The presence is there, steady and real. After a while, he speaks, his voice low, almost as if he is speaking to the room itself. "You can stay as long as you need." The words hang in the air, simple and unadorned. The dog's ears flick at the sound, his head lifting just slightly, eyes resting on Oliver with a softness that was not there before. Outside, The rain begins again, tapping gently against the windows, a quiet rhythm that wraps around the cottage like a distant lullaby. And inside, between the slow build of warmth from the fire and the steady breath of something learning, cautiously, to belong, the silence changes. Not empty, not waiting, but beginning to hold. Something that might, in time, become home. The fire takes its time to grow, small at first, a fragile flame that flickers uncertainly as though deciding whether it belongs here at all, then slowly finding strength in the dry wood beneath it, feeding on patience rather than urgency. The light it casts shifts gently across the room, softening edges, turning worn surfaces into something warmer, something lived in rather than left behind. Oliver remains where he is for a while, seated near the hearth, his forearms resting loosely on his knees, his gaze fixed not on the fire itself, but on the quiet movement within it, as if there is something there that speaks in a language he does not quite hear, but understands all the same. Behind him, the dog has not moved far. He lies where he settled, his body angled in that careful balance between rest and readiness, his ears still responsive to every subtle sound the house makes. The rain continues outside, steady now, tapping softly against the windows, tracing slow paths down the glass that catch the firelight in faint, shifting lines. Time passes without being measured. No clock marks it. No voice interrupts it. It simply unfolds, one quiet moment following another, until Oliver rises at last, the movement unhurried, deliberate. He crosses into the adjoining kitchen, a small space with a worn counter and a kettle that sits slightly askew on the hob, as though it has been placed there without much thought for symmetry. He fills it with water, the sound of it pouring steady and grounding, then sets it to boil, the faint click of the switch echoing softly in the stillness. The dog's head lifts at the sound, his eyes tracking the movement through the open doorway, watching without tension, without fear, simply observing. Oliver moves about the kitchen with a familiarity that does not demand attention, opening a cupboard, taking out a tin, setting it down with care. He does not rush. There is no urgency in the way he works, only a quiet intention that shapes each action. When the kettle begins to hum, then whistle softly, he pours the water into a mug, the steam rising in thin spirals that carry a faint scent of tea into the room. He stands there for a moment, hands wrapped around the warmth, letting it settle into him, as though grounding something that has been unsettled for longer than he admits. Then he turns back, mug in one hand, the tin in the other, and returns to the sitting room. The dog watches him approach, his body still but not rigid, his gaze steady, following the movement with a quiet curiosity. Oliver sets the mug down on a small table beside the chair and kneels again, this time a little closer than before, though not so close as to crowd the space the animal has chosen. He opens the tin with a soft metallic click, the sound distinct in the quiet, and the scent that follows is subtle but unmistakable. Food. Simple. Unremarkable. But enough. The dog's ears shift forward slightly, his head lifting a fraction higher, the scent reaching him before the sight, stirring something instinctive but not overwhelming. Oliver takes a small bowl from the side, places it on the floor a short distance away, not directly in front of the dog, not too close, leaving space for choice rather than demand. He spoons the contents into it slowly, the soft sound of it settling into the bowl measured, deliberate. Then he withdraws his hand and sits back again, not watching too closely, not pressing the moment. No rush, he says quietly, the words simple, offered without expectation. The dog remains where he is for a few seconds more, his gaze moving from Oliver to the bowl, then back again, weighing something unseen. Then, slowly he shifts. One paw forward, then another. He rises with care, his movements still cautious but less restrained than before. The distance between him and the bowl is small, but it carries the same quiet weight as every step he has taken since leaving that pen. He lowers his head slightly as he approaches, pausing just short of the bowl, his nose lifting as he takes in the scent again, confirming what he already knows. Then, at last, he eats. Not quickly, not with desperation, but with a steady, measured rhythm that speaks more of restraint than hunger, as though he has learned, somewhere along the way, that taking too much too fast can cost more than it gives. Oliver watches without staring, his gaze soft, his posture relaxed, allowing the moment to unfold without interruption. The fire crackles softly beside them. The rain continues its quiet rhythm beyond the walls, and something in the room shifts again, subtle but certain. When the bowl is empty, the dog steps back, not retreating, simply moving away with the same quiet control he has shown from the beginning. He does not look for more. He does not search. He simply returns to the place he had chosen before, lowering himself once more onto the floor, though this time his body settles a little deeper, the tension easing by another small degree. Oliver reaches for his tea, lifting the mug, the warmth now less sharp but still present. He takes a slow sip, his gaze drifting once more to the fire, though his awareness remains attuned to the presence across the room. "We will see," he murmurs after a while, not speaking to the dog directly, not even to himself in any clear sense, but to the space between them, to whatever it is that has begun here without announcement or certainty. The dog's ears flick at the sound, his eyes opening fully now, resting on Oliver with a quiet attentiveness that holds no fear, no urgency, only a growing stillness that feels, in its own way, like the beginning of trust. Outside, the rain softens again, the steady tapping easing into a lighter rhythm, as though the world itself is settling into the same quiet pace. And inside, between the fading warmth of tea, the steady glow of firelight, and the measured breath of two lives learning the shape of each other without force or demand, something fragile takes hold, not yet strong, not yet certain, but real enough to remain. The evening settles slowly, not as a sudden shift, but as a gradual dimming of the world beyond the windows, the gray sky deepening into a softer shade that blurs the edges of the fields and hedgerows outside until they feel distant, almost unreal. Inside, the fire has found its rhythm, no longer fragile, no longer uncertain, but steady, casting a quiet warmth that reaches further into the room with each passing minute. Oliver leans back into the worn armchair now, the fabric creasing beneath his weight in a way that suggests familiarity rather than comfort, his mug resting loosely in his hand, long since cooled. He does not drink from it anymore. He simply holds it, as though the habit itself offers something the tea no longer can. Across the room, the dog remains where he settled, though his posture has shifted again, subtly, almost imperceptibly. His head now rests lower, not fully against the floor, but closer than before, his body no longer held in that constant readiness to rise. His eyes remain open, watching, but the sharpness within them has softened, replaced by something quieter, something that does not search for threat in every shadow. The house begins to reveal its voice in the silence, small sounds that would go unnoticed in a busier place. The gentle settling of wood, the faint whisper of wind along the edges of the roof, the occasional soft tick from the cooling metal of the stove. None of it startles the dog. None of it draws more than a brief flick of his ears, a momentary shift in attention before stillness returns. Oliver notices. He always notices. It is not something he tries to do. It is simply the way he has learned to exist, to read the world not in grand gestures, but in the smallest changes, the quietest movements. He sets the mug down at last, the soft clink against the table sounding louder than expected, and leans forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees once more. His gaze moves to the dog, not directly at first, but gradually, as though acknowledging something that has earned its place in the room rather than demanding it. "You have done this before," he says quietly, the words not a question, not even a statement meant to be answered, but an observation that settles into the space between them. The dog's ears lift slightly at the sound, his head rising just a fraction, his gaze meeting Oliver's for a brief moment. There is no fear there now, no tension, only a quiet awareness, as though something within him recognizes the tone, if not the meaning. Oliver exhales slowly, the breath steady, controlled, carrying with it the weight of something unspoken. His eyes shift, not to the fire, not to the walls, but inward, to a place shaped by memory rather than sight. For a moment, the room holds two silences, one present, one remembered. A field somewhere far from here, not green like these, but dry, stretching beneath a sky that burned brighter than it should. The sound of boots against uneven ground, the faint hum of something unseen in the air. And beside him, always beside him, a presence that moved without question, without hesitation, guided not by words alone, but by something deeper, something built over time and trust and shared purpose. Oliver's hand shifts unconsciously, his fingers brushing against his forearm where the ink rests beneath the sleeve, the outline of a dog that has long since become more than just a mark on skin. He does not look at it. He does not need to. The memory is enough. Across the room, the dog shifts again, not in response to the words, not directly, but as though something in the air has changed, something subtle that only he can feel. He rises slowly, his movements careful but no longer hesitant, his body carrying less of that guarded weight with each step. He does not approach Oliver immediately. Instead, he circles slightly, the motion quiet, deliberate, choosing a new place within the room. Closer now. Not beside. Not yet. But closer than before. He lowers himself again, this time within a few feet of the chair, his body angled not toward the door, but toward Oliver, though his eyes still track the room with that steady vigilance that is not yet fully faded. Oliver does not move. He does not reach out. He allows the space to settle, to breathe, to become something shared rather than claimed. The fire continues its quiet work, the light shifting, softening, wrapping the room in a warmth that does not demand attention but offers it freely. Outside, the rain has nearly stopped, leaving behind only the faint sound of droplets falling from leaves and eaves, a gentle rhythm that marks the passing of time without urgency. Minutes stretch, unmeasured, unbroken. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the dog's head lowers fully, resting at last against the floor. His eyes remain open for a few seconds longer, watching, listening, as though confirming that the world has not changed in those brief moments. Then, at last, they close. Not fully, not deeply, but enough. Enough to rest without fear. Oliver notices the shift immediately. He does not react. He does not speak. But something within him settles in response, a quiet recognition of a boundary crossed not by force, but by choice. He leans back again, the chair creaking softly beneath him, his gaze returning to the fire, though his awareness remains fixed on the presence nearby. All right, he murmurs after a while, the words barely audible, carrying no expectation, no demand, only a simple acknowledgement of what has begun. The room holds that moment gently, without interruption, without need for anything more. And in the quiet that follows, between the steady warmth of the fire and the soft, measured breath of something that has not yet learned to trust fully but has chosen, for now, to rest, the distance between two lives grows smaller, not in leaps, not in certainty, but in the smallest, most human way possible. The night does not arrive all at once. It settles in layers, slow and deliberate, dimming the edges of the room until the fire becomes the only true source of light, its glow steady and low, casting long, quiet shadows that stretch and fold against the walls. Oliver does not notice the exact moment the day slips away. He simply becomes aware that the outside world has gone still, that the faint outlines beyond the windows have dissolved into darkness, leaving only the soft reflection of firelight in the glass. The house feels different now, not empty, not silent in the way it was before, but held, as though something has taken root within it, subtle and unseen. He shifts slightly in the chair, the movement careful, measured, not wanting to disturb the fragile stillness that has settled between them. Across the room, the dog remains where he lay, his breathing deepened now, more even, the rise and fall of his chest steady in a rhythm that speaks of rest rather than vigilance. His ears still respond now and then to the smallest sounds, a faint shift, a distant creak, but they settle again just as quickly, no longer. Held in that constant tension that once defined every movement. Oliver watches him without appearing to, his gaze drifting in that quiet way that never quite fixes, yet never fully leaves. He knows better than to interrupt what has been given freely. Trust, even in its smallest form, is not something to be handled carelessly. Time passes. The fire burns lower, the crackles softening into the occasional shift of embers, a quiet reminder that even warmth must be tended if it is to remain. Oliver leans forward again, slowly, placing another small piece of wood onto the glowing coals, careful not to disturb the fragile balance that has formed. The flame responds gently, not flaring, but accepting, growing just enough to sustain itself. The dog stirs at the movement, not fully waking, but shifting slightly, his head lifting just a fraction before settling again. His eyes open briefly, catching the flicker of light, the silhouette of Oliver near the fire. For a moment, there is a pause, a quiet recognition, as though confirming that nothing has changed, that the presence remains where it should. Then his eyes close once more. Oliver exhales, the sound barely audible, a release of something that has been held without his noticing. He rises slowly from the chair, joints stiff in a way that speaks of years rather than discomfort, and moves toward the small hallway. He does not switch on the overhead light. Instead, he moves through the dimness with the ease of someone who knows each step, each turn, each slight unevenness in the floor. He returns a moment later with a folded blanket, worn at the edges but clean, carrying it loosely in one hand. He pauses just inside the room, considering the space, the distance, the balance that has been built. Then, carefully, he steps forward, stopping a few feet from where the dog rests. He lowers himself slowly, placing the blanket on the floor nearby, not directly over him, not too close, but within reach of warmth, of choice. The fabric settles softly against the wood, a quiet offering rather than an imposition. The dog's ears flick again at the sound, his head lifting slightly, eyes opening once more. This time, they do not carry uncertainty. They simply observe. He looks at the blanket, then at Oliver, then back again, processing in that silent way that requires no language. Oliver does not move. He does not speak. He simply remains, his presence steady, his posture open, allowing the moment to unfold without pressure. After a few seconds, the dog shifts. Slowly, deliberately, he adjusts his position, moving just enough that his body comes to rest partly upon the edge of the blanket. Not fully, not yet, but enough to accept what has been offered. It is a small movement, almost nothing, and yet it carries more weight than any larger gesture could. Oliver notices. Of course he does, but he does not react. He simply nods once, almost to himself, then rises quietly, stepping back to give the space its freedom again. He returns to the chair, lowering himself into it with the same measured care, his hands resting loosely on the arms, his gaze drifting once more toward the fire. The room settles again, deeper now, quieter, the kind of silence that does not ask anything of those within it. Outside, the wind has stilled completely. The rain has stopped. Even the distant sounds of the village have faded, leaving only the soft, steady presence of night pressing gently against the walls. Oliver's eyes grow heavier, not from exhaustion alone, but from the easing of something that has been held too tightly for too long. He does not fall asleep. Not fully, but he allows himself to rest, the boundary between awareness and sleep softening in a way that has not come easily in recent years. Across the room, the dog's breathing deepens further, his body settling more fully into the warmth beneath him, the edge of the blanket now drawn slightly closer by his own movement, as though instinct has guided him to claim just a little more of it. His head lowers completely, resting against the fabric, his eyes closed without that constant need to reopen, to check, to confirm. For the first time, there is no hesitation in the way he rests, no readiness to rise at the smallest shift, only stillness, real and unguarded. The fire continues its quiet burn, the light soft and steady, holding the room in a gentle glow. That does not fade with the night. And in that shared silence, between a man who has learned to carry his past without speaking it, and a dog who has endured without understanding why, something unseen settles into place. Not a bond formed in a single moment, not a promise spoken aloud, but the quiet beginning of something that does not need to be named to be real. Morning does not arrive with noise. It seeps in quietly, a pale wash of light pressing gently against the edges of the curtains, soft enough that it does not wake the room, only suggests that the night has loosened its hold. The fire has burned down to embers, faint and red, breathing out the last of their warmth in slow, fading pulses. Oliver stirs before he fully wakes, the habit of light, sleep guiding him back to awareness without urgency. He does not move at first. He listens. The house is still, not empty, never empty now. There is a difference, a presence that has settled into the corners, into the spaces between sound and silence. He opens his eyes gradually, The morning light dim but clear enough to outline the room in soft gray tones. For a moment, he does not look toward the floor. He allows himself that small uncertainty, the question that forms without words. Then he shifts his gaze. The dog is still there, not in the exact same place, but close. Curled now, more fully than before, the blanket drawn beneath him in a way that speaks of movement during the night, of a body adjusting not out of fear, but in search of comfort. His breathing is deep, steady, uninterrupted. Oliver watches him for a moment longer than necessary, though necessity has little to do with it. Something in his chest eases, subtle but real. He leans forward slowly, rising from the chair with care, mindful of the quiet, of the fragile rhythm that has formed within these walls. The floor creaks faintly beneath his weight, a familiar sound, one that carries no threat. The dog stirs at it, not sharply, not with alarm, but with the gentle shift of something waking without urgency. His eyes open halfway, then fully, adjusting to the light, to the presence across the room. For a second, there is stillness. Then recognition. Not complete, not absolute, but enough. Oliver gives a small nod, almost imperceptible. "Morning," he says quietly, the words simple, grounded, offered without expectation of response. The dog's ears lift slightly at the sound, his head rising from the blanket, his gaze steady, watching, not wary, just aware. Oliver moves toward the kitchen again, his steps measured, his routine unfolding without thought. The kettle is filled, set to boil, the small, ordinary sounds returning to the house in a way that feels different now, less like intrusion, more like continuation. The dog remains where he is at first, observing, his body still but no longer held in that careful tension of the night before. He shifts once, stretching slightly, his limbs extending in a slow, deliberate motion that speaks of rest rather than readiness. Then he rises, not abruptly, not cautiously, simply rising because it is time to do so. He steps forward, moving into the kitchen doorway, pausing there as though measuring the space again, confirming that it remains unchanged. Oliver glances over briefly, then returns his attention to the kettle. "You can come in," he says, the words soft, without command. The dog watches him, then takes a step. The threshold is crossed without hesitation this time. The kitchen is small, but the light finds it easily, slipping through the narrow window above the sink, catching the faint steam that begins to rise from the kettle. The dog moves carefully at first, his nose lifting, taking in the scents that define this place. Wood, water, something warm beneath it all. He does not wander far. He remains within a few feet of Oliver, not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel the presence. Oliver reaches for another bowl, rinses it with a brief splash of water, the sound clear and simple. He sets it down, prepares the same food as before, the motion unhurried, consistent. There is something in repetition that builds trust, something in predictability that softens the edges of uncertainty. He places the bowl on the floor again, not too close, not too far. The dog approaches sooner this time. There is no long pause, no extended hesitation. He lowers his head and eats, the same measured pace, but without the weight that had accompanied it before. Oliver watches for a moment, then turns away slightly, allowing the act to remain private, unobserved. When the kettle whistles, he pours the water, the steam rising again in those thin, quiet spirals. He stands there, hands wrapped around the mug, looking out through the small window at the garden beyond, where the grass still holds the dampness of the night, each blade catching the early light in faint, silver traces. Behind him, the sound of eating stops. There is a brief pause, then the soft movement of paws against the floor. Oliver does not turn immediately. He waits. Then he feels it. Not a touch, not quite, but a presence closer than before, within that space that had remained carefully measured until now. He turns his head slightly. The dog stands just behind him, not at a distance, not watching from across the room, but near, close enough that the warmth of his body is faintly felt, close enough that the space between them has changed in a way that does not need to be named. Oliver remains still. He does not reach out. He does not speak. He simply stands there, allowing the moment to exist without interference. The dog shifts slightly, his head lowering just a fraction, his nose brushing lightly against the fabric of Oliver's sleeve. It is brief, Almost nothing. But it is deliberate. A choice made without fear. Oliver exhales slowly, the breath steady, controlled, carrying something quieter than relief, something deeper than simple recognition. His hand moves, not quickly, not instinctively, but with care, turning slightly, fingers opening, offering rather than taking. He does not touch the dog directly. Not yet. He allows the space to decide. The dog does not move away. He remains there, still, present, the contact not repeated, but not withdrawn either. Outside, the morning continues to unfold, the light growing stronger, the world returning to itself in small, ordinary ways. And inside, in the quiet space between a man who has learned patience through absence and a dog who has learned survival through silence, something shifts again. Not loudly, not completely, but enough to be felt, enough to remain. The moment lingers longer than either of them expects. Not because it is dramatic, not because it demands attention, but because it is so quiet it almost disappears if one is not careful. Oliver remains still, his hand half open at his side, his breath slow and measured as though any sudden movement might disturb something fragile that has only just begun to take shape. The dog does not retreat. He does not press closer either. He simply stands there, his nose near Oliver's sleeve, the faint warmth of his breath barely touching the fabric. It is not contact in the way most would notice. It is something more subtle. A test, perhaps, or a memory trying to find its way back to the surface. Oliver lets his fingers move slightly, not toward the dog, but in a small, natural shift, as though adjusting to the presence rather than reacting to it. The gesture is enough. The dog's ears flick once, his head tilting almost imperceptibly, reading the movement not as threat, not as command, but as something neutral, something safe. Outside, the morning continues to gather itself. A faint breeze moves through the garden, brushing against the damp grass, carrying the soft scent of earth and leaves through the small gap in the window. Somewhere in the distance, a bird calls, the sound light and ordinary, marking the return of a world that has no knowledge of what is happening inside these walls. Oliver lowers his hand slowly, not withdrawing, simply allowing it to rest again at his side. Easy, he murmurs, the word quiet, almost more breath than voice, but with understanding. Trust does not arrive all at once. It unfolds in fragments, each one small enough to be overlooked, yet together forming something that holds. He lifts his mug again, taking a slow sip, the tea now lukewarm, but still grounding in its familiarity. The house feels different in daylight. The shadows that had stretched long and uncertain during the night have softened, revealing the small imperfections that define the space. A faint mark along the wall where something once hung. The worn edge of the table where hands have rested countless times. A photograph on the shelf, turned slightly away, as though it has not been adjusted in some time. Oliver leans lightly against the fence, watching, his posture relaxed, his hands resting loosely in his pockets. There is no need to call, no need to direct. The dog circles once near the edge of the grass, then returns, his steps measured, his presence steady. He stops a few feet from Oliver, looking up briefly, meeting his gaze without that earlier distance, without that careful calculation. Just a look. Clear. Present. Oliver nods slightly, the gesture small, almost instinctive. All right, he says again, the words carrying a different weight now, less like an observation, more like an acknowledgement of something that has quietly taken hold. The dog lowers his head once more, stepping closer by a fraction, not enough to touch, but enough that the space between them feels smaller, less defined. The wind shifts again, moving through the trees beyond the garden, the leaves responding with a soft, steady rustle that fills the silence without breaking it. And in that simple morning, in the ordinary light of a day that has no reason to be remembered, something continues to build. Not through grand gestures, not through sudden change, but through these small, deliberate moments where choice replaces fear and presence becomes something that no longer needs to be questioned. Oliver remains where he is, watching, not with expectation, but with a quiet acceptance of whatever comes next. And beside him, though not yet fully at his side, the dog stands a little closer than before, his body no longer shaped by what has been lost, but slowly, steadily, by what might still be found. The morning stretches into late day without ceremony, the light shifting gradually across the garden until the dampness fades and the grass begins to lift under a quieter warmth. Oliver does not rush the hours. He moves through them with the same measured pace, as though time itself has learned to follow his rhythm rather than demand its own. The dog remains close, not tethered, not commanded, but present in a way that feels chosen rather than required. They walk the length of the small garden once, then again, the pattern simple, almost routine, yet carrying a quiet weight that neither of them names. At the edge of the fence, where the wood leans slightly and the world beyond opens into fields that stretch further than the eye can hold, the dog pauses. His ears lift, not sharply, but with a slow awareness, his head tilting as something unseen reaches him before it reaches Oliver. A sound, faint, distant, the low hum of a vehicle moving along the narrow lane beyond the hedgerow. Oliver hears it a moment later. His posture shifts, not tense, not guarded, but attentive in a way that comes from habit rather than concern. The sound grows slightly, then fades again as the vehicle passes without stopping, leaving only the echo of its presence behind. The dog remains still for a second longer, then his body changes. Not in fear, not in uncertainty, but in recognition. It is subtle, almost imperceptible. A tightening in the shoulders. A stillness that feels deeper than before, as though something within him has surfaced without warning. Oliver notices. He always notices. It is all right, he says quietly, the words steady, grounded, offered into the space between them without expectation. The dog does not move immediately. His gaze remains fixed beyond the fence, his ears angled forward, listening to something that no longer exists in the present moment. Distance that respects the space still held between them. They return to the house together, the open door waiting as it had before, the threshold no longer a boundary, but a familiar passage. Inside, the air holds the warmth of earlier, softened now by the quiet passage of time. Oliver moves through the rooms with the same calm routine, checking small things without urgency, straightening what does not need to be straightened, touching surfaces as though confirming their presence. The dog follows loosely, not tracking every step, but remaining within sight, his attention shifting between the man and the space around him. When Oliver reaches the sitting room, he pauses by the shelf where the photograph rests. He hesitates this time, his hand hovering for a second longer than before. Then he picks it up. The frame is simple, the glass slightly dulled by time, but the image within is clear enough. A younger version of himself stands in a place far removed from this quiet village, the light harsher, the ground beneath him unfamiliar to this landscape. Beside him, a dog. Strong, alert, eyes sharp with purpose. Oliver does not speak. He does not move the frame closer or further. He simply looks. The dog in the room notices the shift. Not the image, not the memory, but the change in Oliver's stillness, the subtle tightening that comes with it. He steps forward, not quickly, not cautiously, just moving as though drawn by something he cannot name. He stops a few feet away, his head lifting slightly, his gaze fixed not on the photograph, but on Oliver himself. The silence deepens. It is not empty. It is full. Oliver lowers the frame slowly, setting it back where it was, though not in exactly the same position. Something has shifted. He exhales, a quiet release, then turns. The dog does not move away. He remains where he is, his posture steady, his presence closer than it has been at any point before. Oliver's hand lifts slightly, not reaching fully, not yet, but no longer held back by the same distance. He pauses there, giving the moment space to decide its own shape. Not much, just enough. The distance between them closes by a fraction that feels larger than it is. Oliver's hand moves the rest of the way, slow, deliberate, his fingers brushing lightly against the dog's neck. The contact is brief, gentle, without pressure. The dog does not pull away. He remains still, accepting, his head lowering just slightly, not in submission, but in quiet acknowledgement. The touch does not linger. It does not need to. Oliver withdraws his hand slowly, his breath steady, his gaze soft. "All right," he says again, though this time the words carry something more. Not just acknowledgement. Something closer to understanding. Outside, the light continues its slow descent, the day moving forward without pause. And inside, between memory and presence, between what has been lost, and what is beginning to return, something unseen takes another step forward. Not with certainty, not with finality, but with enough truth to remain. The afternoon leans quietly toward evening, the light thinning into longer shadows that stretch across the floorboards and climb slowly up the walls as though the house itself is breathing in a slower rhythm. Oliver does not return to the chair immediately. He remains standing where the moment had settled, his hand now lowered, his posture still carrying the echo of that brief contact. It had been nothing by ordinary measure, a touch so light it could be missed, and yet it lingers in the air between them like something that has weight beyond its size. The dog does not move away. He stands where he is, his body calm, his head slightly lowered, not in hesitation, not in doubt, but in a quiet stillness that feels deliberate. His eyes remain on Oliver, not searching, not questioning, simply present in a way that holds. Oliver exhales slowly, the breath steady, his gaze softening without intention. He turns slightly then, moving toward the window, his steps unhurried, allowing the moment to settle rather than chasing it further. Outside, the sky has shifted again, the pale gray deepening toward a cooler tone, the kind that suggests the day will end without spectacle, without color, simply fading into the quiet of evening. The garden holds that same stillness, the grass no longer bright, but muted, the edges softened by the changing light. The dog follows. Not immediately, not as before. There is no need to track every movement now. But after a few seconds, he steps forward, closing the distance not out of uncertainty, but out of choice. He stops near the window, standing beside Oliver, not touching, but close enough that the space between them no longer feels like separation. Oliver notices the presence without turning. "It is different, isn't it?" he says quietly, his voice low, almost as if the words are meant more for the room than for the animal beside him. The dog's ears shift at the sound, his head tilting slightly, not in confusion, but in recognition of tone. Outside, a faint wind moves through the trees beyond the garden, carrying with it the soft rustle of leaves, a sound that feels distant and near at the same time. Oliver's gaze remains fixed beyond the glass, but his awareness stays anchored to the presence at his side. He shifts his weight slightly, one hand resting against the edge of the window frame, his fingers tracing the worn wood without thought. The dog adjusts his stance, mirroring the movement in his own quiet way, his body settling into a posture that no longer anticipates departure. Time passes, not measured, not marked, just moving forward in that steady, unspoken way. Then something changes. It is not loud, it is not sudden, but it is enough. The dog's head lifts slightly, his ears angling toward the hallway behind them. Oliver hears it a moment later. A sound. Soft. Familiar. The faint creak of the front gate moving in the wind. It is nothing. A small shift. A movement that carries no meaning beyond itself. But the dog reacts in a way that is different from before. He does not tense. He does not retreat. He turns. His body aligns toward the sound, his posture attentive, alert in a way that feels purposeful rather than uncertain. Oliver watches him, his expression unchanged, but his attention sharpened. The dog takes a step toward the hallway, then another. His movement is smooth, controlled, as though guided by something remembered rather than learned. He reaches the front door and stops, his nose lifting slightly, testing the air, his ears forward, his body still. Oliver follows at a distance, not interfering, not directing. He stands just behind, observing. "What is it?" he asks quietly, though he does not expect an answer in words. The dog remains focused, his gaze fixed on the door, his body held in that same steady alertness. Then, slowly, something shifts again. Not outwardly, inward. His posture softens. The tension fades. The moment passes. Whatever had drawn his attention is gone, or perhaps it was never there at all. He exhales, the breath visible only in the subtle rise and fall of his chest, then turns back. But this time, he does not return to the center of the room. He does not create distance. Instead, he walks directly toward Oliver, his steps unbroken, his gaze steady. The space between them closes without hesitation. Oliver remains still. He does not reach out. He does not speak. He simply allows the moment to come to him. The dog stops within arm's reach, closer than before, close enough that there is no question left in the distance between them. For a second, Nothing happens. Then, quietly, without force, without uncertainty, the dog lowers his head and rests it lightly against Oliver's hand. It is not a push, not a demand, just a simple placement. A choice made without hesitation. Oliver's fingers close slightly, instinctively, gently, his hand settling against the side of the dog's neck, the contact steady, grounded. He does not move further. He does not tighten his grip. He simply remains there, allowing the moment to exist exactly as it is. The dog does not pull away. He remains still, his breathing calm, his posture relaxed in a way it has not been before. The house holds that silence around them, the fading light pressing softly against the windows, the outside world continuing without knowledge of what has shifted inside these walls. Oliver exhales slowly, the breath carrying something deeper now, something that has been waiting without his knowing. "All right," he says once more, the words quieter than before, but fuller, as though they carry the weight of something finally. Understood. The dog does not respond in movement. He does not need to. The moment has already answered itself. And in that simple act, in that quiet decision to step forward rather than hold back, the distance that once defined everything between them is no longer there. Not gone entirely, not erased, but changed. Enough to be felt, enough to remain. The contact lingers longer than either of them expects, not because it is held in place, but because neither of them feels the need to break it. Oliver's hand rests lightly against the dog's neck, fingers barely curved, the warmth of living presence steady beneath his touch. There is no urgency in it, no claim, just a quiet acknowledgement that something has shifted beyond return. The dog remains still, his head lowered into that space, his breathing calm, even, unguarded in a way that would have been unthinkable not long ago. The room holds the moment without interruption. The light outside continues its slow descent, the sky now edging toward evening, the pale gray giving way to deeper tones that soften everything they touch. Oliver does not move immediately. He allows the silence to settle, to become something complete rather than something interrupted too soon. Then, gently, he withdraws his hand, not abruptly, not fully, just enough to let the contact fade rather than end. The dog lifts his head slightly as the touch recedes, his eyes following the movement, not with loss, but with quiet awareness. There is no confusion in him now, no searching for meaning, only presence. Oliver steps back a fraction, his posture easing, his breath steady. "Come on," he says softly, the words simple, familiar, carrying no command, only direction shaped by calm intention. The dog watches him for a moment, then turns, moving with him as though the space between them has already agreed on something unspoken. They return to the sitting room together, the fire now reduced to a steady glow, the last pieces of wood shifting gently as the heat settles into the stone. Oliver kneels again, adding another small log, not to build the flame high, but to keep it alive, to maintain what has already been given. The dog settles nearby without hesitation this time, lowering himself onto the blanket fully, no longer half within, half without. His body relaxes into it, his weight carried not by readiness, but by rest. Oliver notices. He always notices. He sits back in the chair once more, though his posture is different now. Less guarded, less held. His hands rest more naturally, his gaze no longer fixed outward, but shared between the room and the presence beside him. Time moves again, quietly, steadily, as the evening deepens. The shadows return, but they no longer carry the same uncertainty. They feel part of the space, part of the rhythm that has begun to form within these walls. The dog shifts once, adjusting his position, then settles again, his head resting against the blanket, his eyes half closed, watching without the need to remain fully alert. Outside, the wind rises slightly, brushing against the side of the house, a soft, continuous sound that fills the spaces between stillness. Oliver leans back further into the chair, his gaze drifting once more to the shelf where the photograph rests. He looks at it differently now, not avoiding it, not holding on to it, just seeing it for what it is, a part of something that has been, not something that defines what remains. He exhales slowly, the breath steady, carrying something lighter than before. After a while, he rises again, moving into the kitchen, preparing the same simple meal, the same routine, but with a subtle shift in the way he moves. There is less distance in him now, Less hesitation. The dog follows, not out of uncertainty, but out of quiet habit that has begun to form. He stands beside Oliver as before, close enough that the warmth of his presence is unmistakable. This time, when Oliver reaches down to place the bowl on the floor, his hand brushes briefly against the dog's shoulder. The contact is natural, unforced. The dog does not flinch. He does not hesitate. He simply accepts it as part of the moment, lowering his head to eat without breaking the quiet rhythm that has been established. Oliver watches him for a moment, then turns away, giving space, not because it is required, but because it is understood. When the meal is finished, the dog steps back, not retreating, just completing the act. He looks up at Oliver then, his gaze steady, calm, no longer carrying the weight of uncertainty that once defined every look. Oliver meets it without pause. "All right," he says again, though now the words feel different, less like reassurance, more like recognition. The evening continues, the fire glowing steadily, the house holding its quiet warmth. Oliver returns to the chair, but this time, the dog does not remain across the room. He moves closer, not circling, not hesitating, simply stepping forward until the distance between them is small enough to feel shared. He lowers himself onto the floor beside the chair, his body angled slightly toward Oliver, not fully pressed against him, but close enough that the boundary no longer feels necessary. Oliver rests his hand lightly against the arm of the chair, his fingers drifting down just enough to touch the edge of the dog's fur. The contact is gentle, unremarkable, and yet it holds everything that has come before it. The dog does not move away. He does not seek more. He simply remains, his breathing steady, his presence grounded in a way that no longer questions its place. Outside, the night settles once more, wrapping the house in its quiet, the world beyond fading into shadow. Inside, the warmth remains, not just from the fire, but from something quieter, something that has taken root without demand or declaration. Oliver's eyes grow heavier again, but this time, the rest that comes is different. It is not guarded. It is not shallow. It carries a sense of ease that has not been present for longer than he remembers. Beside him, the dog rests without tension, his body fully settled, his trust no longer a fragile thing held at a distance, but something quietly given. And in that stillness, in that shared space where nothing more needs to be proven or understood, the beginning that once felt uncertain becomes something real. Not complete, not finished, but enough to hold, enough to stay. The night settles deeper than before, not heavy, not pressing, but complete in a way that feels earned rather than imposed. The fire has quieted to a low, steady glow, the embers breathing out a soft warmth that fills the room without asking for attention. Oliver does not remember the exact moment his eyes closed, only that the chair beneath him no longer felt like a place of waiting, but a place of rest. When he wakes, it is not with the sharp edge of habit, not with the instinct to check, to listen for what might be wrong. It is softer than that, slower, the kind of waking that belongs to someone who has, for a moment at least, been allowed to forget the need to remain alert. The room is dim, but not dark. The early trace of dawn has begun to find its way through the curtains, a faint gray light pressing gently against the edges of the world. Oliver breathes in, steady, quiet, his gaze drifting downward without urgency. The dog is still there, closer than before, not just near the chair now, but resting beside it in a way that no longer feels temporary. His body is fully relaxed, his breathing deep and even, his head resting against the floor with a calm that speaks of something settled beyond instinct. Oliver watches him for a moment, longer than necessary, though necessity no longer defines these moments. There is no surprise in his expression, no disbelief, only a quiet recognition that something has changed in a way that cannot be undone. He leans forward slightly, his hand lowering without thought, his fingers brushing gently along the dog's fur. The contact is natural now, unremarkable. The dog stirs at the touch, his eyes opening slowly, adjusting to the faint light, to the presence that no longer feels unfamiliar. He does not move away. He does not hesitate. He simply lifts his head slightly, his gaze meeting Oliver's without question. For a second, they remain like that. No movement, no sound, just a shared stillness that carries more weight than any word could hold. Oliver nods once, the gesture small, instinctive. "Morning," he says quietly, though this time the word feels different. Not an introduction, not a beginning, something closer to continuation. The dog's ears lift slightly, his body shifting as he rises, not with urgency, not with caution, but with a calm that feels earned. He stretches once, slow and deliberate, his limbs extending, his back arching slightly before settling again. Then he steps closer, not circling, not testing, just moving forward in a straight, certain line until he stands beside Oliver without distance between them. Oliver remains still, his hand resting lightly against the dog's shoulder, the contact steady, grounded. Outside, the morning begins again, the faint sounds of the village returning in quiet layers. A distant door, the soft rumble of a vehicle far down the lane. The world continuing as it always does. But inside, something has shifted in a way that does not return to what it was before. Oliver stands, moving toward the door, his steps unhurried, the routine already forming without need for thought. The dog follows without pause. Not behind, not trailing, but beside. The door opens, the morning air slipping in, cool and fresh, carrying the scent of damp grass and waking earth. They step outside together. The garden holds the same quiet as before, the same uneven ground, the same worn fence, but it feels different now. Not because it has changed, but because the space within it is no longer divided. The dog moves forward, his head lifting, his ears relaxed, his body no longer shaped by what he expects to lose. Oliver watches him, his posture easy, his presence steady. There is no need to call, no need to guide. The dog circles once near the edge of the grass, then returns, stopping beside Oliver without hesitation. Their eyes meet again, not searching, not questioning, simply acknowledging what is already known. Oliver exhales slowly, the breath carrying something quieter than relief, something deeper than understanding. He rests his hand once more against the dog's neck, the touch firm enough to be felt, gentle enough to remain unclaimed. The dog leans into it, not fully, not heavily, but enough. Enough to show that the space between them no longer needs to be measured. The wind moves lightly through the trees beyond the garden, the leaves responding with a soft, steady sound that fills the silence without breaking it. And in that ordinary morning, beneath a sky that offers no spectacle, something simple and enduring takes its place. Not a rescue, not a miracle in the way people often name such things. Just two lives, once separate, now moving within the same quiet rhythm. Oliver looks out across the fields, his gaze steady, no longer carrying the same weight it once did. The past remains where it is. It does not disappear. It does not need to. Because beside him, in the present, something has chosen to stay. And sometimes that is enough. Not everything needs to be found. Not everything needs to be explained. Some things simply arrive, quietly, without demand, and remain because they are allowed to. The dog stands with him, his body still, his presence grounded, no longer waiting for something to be taken away. The distance that once defined him is gone now, not erased, but replaced. And in its place, something quieter, stronger, more enduring has begun to grow. The kind that does not ask to be named. The kind that simply is.